Coogs House. All right, a major college football rivalry played over 100 years ended on Wednesday. What does that mean for the Houston Cougars?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who can't stop by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you can lay us on the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. And welcome back to the YouTube channel. That's where you found us. It is so good to see you again. Remember, we're giving something away every 250 subscribers. The next one is a hat at a Locked On Cougs hat with a little paw print on the front. Giving one of those away at the 1,500 marker. We are just over 4,200 subscribers, so make sure to subscribe down below. Help us get there, and like and comment on the video to let us know that you're in the contest. Obviously, we're also been putting on social media and stuff like that, but we're doing a giveaway at 2,000 YouTube subscribers if we get there before the TCU game to kick off the Big 12 season, the first season in the Big 12. We've been giving away a Houston Cougar football jersey, a replica jersey with the Big 12 logo on it. It's really cool. I hope you guys hit subscribe down below and want to win that jersey. It's going to be a fun way to kick off the season. That should be a fun season. So if after talking about non-conference schedules and all kinds of future Cougar football and former Cougar football players, you're kind of like at a loss of what to say, you're more of a basketball guy or an Olympic sports person or what have you, tell us in the comments down below if you put bell peppers on your pizza. Okay, so here's the deal. Today is Thursday. Yesterday, it was reported by a number of outlets. I think The Athletic had it first, but it might have been Action Network, if I'm being completely honest, that TCU and SMU are officially going to put one of the longest college football rivalries on pause starting in 2025. They've played each other for 101. They played each other in football 101 times. TCU does lead the series by 10. And it looks like TCU is looking to make some scheduling moves. And frankly, there's a lot of, people reading between the lines. Is TCU trying to keep a non-conference spot open for UT Austin and only wants to play one school in state? Who knows? The way this impacts Houston, though, is very suddenly SMU, a rivalry of Houston's as well, has a non-conference slot open that I don't think anyone was banking on them having open anytime soon, starting in 2025. And for what it's worth, let's go and break down some nuts and bolts here. I guess the Big 12 requires you to play one Power 5 school and at least one Group of 5 school in your non-conference play, right? So that means that third non-conference game, you can kind of play with who you look at, who you see. Most schools go to another Group of 5 school because the talent in the Big 12 and so on. You're already playing Power 5 schools as the way out. Anyway, most schools just have the one Power 5 school from a perspective of your win-loss record, money making, that kind of stuff. And SMU, as it stands, would be a Group of 5 school to fit in that schedule. And I am going to make the argument that I think that Houston should look into adding SMU, who now has empty spots on their future schedules, into their own spots to keep that rivalry going. Now, they have played just 37 times. I think a lot of people think this rivalry is a bigger deal because Houston and Dallas are rivals in so many things, whether that's playing Arlington in pro baseball or, the Rockets, the Mavs, the Texans, the Cowboys to some extent, right? The rivalries do go back and forth between those two cities. And frankly, it's, it's the two major metropolitan areas in Texas, but it's also kind of just like two very culturally different places that are only separated by a stretch of about 4.5 hours and I-45. So I look at this as a way to win over the DFW Metroplex in terms of recruiting. TCU is in Fort Worth, but culturally, Fort Worth and Dallas, where SMU are very, 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 very different, right? Fort Worth is a lot more, I think, of what people from outside of Texas probably look at as like good old cowboy Texas. Like there's things to do there that you would never do in Dallas, and vice versa, whereas Dallas is a little bit more yuppiness to it, and there's just a little more cash flow and things like that. And especially when you look at SMU. And so I think that culturally, Dallas offers a great way for Houston to get into recruiting ground they already do. I mean, like Clayton Tune, longtime Houston quarterback, is from north of Dallas in a suburb. And so like you see a lot of DFW kids coming to Houston. I don't mean to say that there's not like any impact there, but I do think using the Power 5 resources you're going to get in the Big 12, making that trip up I-45 might pay dividends in getting kids back once you can kind of lay claim to that land. I know TCU thinks they have a lot of it, but TCU also, for what it's worth, has only recently really been striking gold in their own metroplex. They kind of have been making their money, and a lot of their success in the last 20 years has been from kids from all over the rest of the state of Texas, and finding kids that are like 3-star receivers and turning them into NFL safeties and that kind of stuff, right? They want to go into the Metroplex and take recruiting and like dominate SMU in a way once you have your resources in 2025, 26, 27, et cetera, might be the way to go. Now, what does Houston have on their schedule currently in the non-conference? They currently have Power 5 scheduled in OU in 2024 and 2028. They have LSU in 2027. They had Colorado in 2025, 26, and Utah in 2026, 27. Those games are getting moved around, obviously, have to cancel because Colorado and Utah are becoming conference opponents. And so those don't count as non-conference games. You got to find ways to move those out of your schedule and find other games. As far as non-conference, non-Power 5 games go, they do have UNLV in 2024. They currently have Boise State in 2024 and 2025, although it does look like those games may fall through for a number of reasons, but I think one of them be that there's a real chance Boise State moves into something else like the Pac 4/12 and changes up what that means for Houston on their schedule. So with that happening, you currently don't have, if Boise were to drop any 2025 game scheduled because you've already had to move Colorado, you only have 2 of your 3 in 2024, and 2026 they just have Georgia Southern on the schedule for non-conference. In 2027 you have LSU and Georgia Southern, and then 2028 you have UNLV, Sam Houston State, and Oklahoma. In the Big 12, it looks like they're going to be playing 9 conference games year in, year out. That means you have the 3 non-con to play with. SMU, again, fits that because I think the recruiting battle up the road is great. It's a fun rivalry for the fans, and it is a Dallas versus Houston kind of thing culturally. There are a number of different things that you can like tie that back to great games. I mean, this past year's game, 2022 game, did not go our way, obviously, but like a crazy high-scoring affair. If you like touchdowns, it's hard to disagree with anything that happened in that game. The year before, obviously, close, fun game that did go our way, right? So, like, those kinds of things, the yin and yang of that's a ton of fun. For whatever it's worth, as we wrap this up with SMU specifically, SMU and Houston again have played 37 times. Houston is up 22-14 with 1 tie in that series. They played like every year from 1975 to 1995. And then with the exception of 2000, they didn't play again until 2005, and they played every year since then. The 1983 game was like a marquee game they sent to Tokyo. Houston actually was kind of not in their best shape that season, but Houston Cougars of the 80s, they thought they might be, so they played that game in Tokyo. I think the idea to make this a fun non-conference game is a good thing for Houston. I also, and this will tie into the second segment some too, a big deal for Houston when everyone else left to the Big 12 was Houston got left behind because no one wanted to come play Houston. Houston doesn't have to be scared like that. Houston has Houston in their back pocket. They can go play SMU in Dallas and not worry about it, right? People didn't want to come to Houston and play Houston for fear of losing to Houston in their place, and Oklahoma did just that, right? Just not that long ago, frankly. I don't think Houston should have that worry about playing SMU in Dallas, and especially if SMU were to get that Power 5 invite. We've seen rumors of the Pac-12. Just Wednesday afternoon, there were talks that George W. Bush is calling ACC schools as a representative of SMU, trying to persuade them to add SMU to the conference. SMU donors and boosters are saying they will forego money for their first 5 years in a Power 5 conference. They'll just make up for it with booster money just to get into it. They just want to get in, right? Adding SMU as your Power 5 team, especially if they're going to be broke like that, could be a really easy way to kind of bolster your schedule, add some wins and things like that, because Houston's going to be getting their Power 5 money. They're going to get that influx of things. And frankly, it's winning rivalry games. It's winning in-state things over kids that are looking at you versus SMU in-state. And if they move up to the Power 5, I think it's a win-win-win, right, for Houston, because they're not going to be as strong as other Power 5 options would be. And it's ought to be a win in your back pocket. Now, in the second segment, I'm not going to laugh at George W. Bush calling other ACC schools, because I could laugh at that a lot. But in the second segment, I do want to talk some about other schools that maybe don't have W on the call sheet, and how they would match up with Houston, who they could be in the non-conference spots we've got open. But first, we got to talk about FanDuel. And at FanDuel, we've got some fun stuff about with this football season, because football season is about to kick off. The NFL season is just around the corner, folks. And FanDuel is giving you a chance to win all season long, because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets back every time they win in the regular season. So if you go to FanDuel.com and go to their sportsbook, if I pull this back up, you can go bet on things like the Texans to win football games. The Texans are quite a long shot to win the Super Bowl, but then every time they win a game, you get bonus bets. You can go and win Kansas City Chiefs to win the Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes, Texas-born kid, etc. And see, every time they win throughout the week or throughout the year, week to week, you would then get a bonus bet back to place on other teams, parlays, wagers, etc. Pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets back for every victory they have. You can put your bonus bets on spreads, player props, overs, unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets back with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, and make sure you tell them that we sent you. All right. So I said in my second segment, I want to talk some about other teams that maybe don't have George W. Bush on their call sheet that are good options for non-conference. So some of my factoring things here, each school has a little bit different pull to me as well. But things I was looking for were, either Group of 5 or Power 5, because frankly, we have spots for both open with all the movement in Houston's schedule and Colorado and Utah moving into the Big 12, and thus opening up spots as well. There is currently, if Boise State really drops, there is no game in 2025. So some with 2025 would take some precedence, but was not like necessarily the only thing I was looking for. And then they have spots for either game in each of 2024, 26, and 27. Obviously, if you can get scheduled in 28, 29, 30, that's fun too. But I also am not silly. I look at the way the conference realignment is happening. The ACC could fall apart. The ACC could lose some teams. Pac-12, Pac-4 could send some more teams to be like, I'm not going to necessarily go too far down the line either. But one team that came to mind for me, let's just get this out the way. I think it would behoove Houston to find a way to continue to play Texas year in and year out. It's UT Austin. It maintains a rivalry from the Southwest Conference days. UT Austin seems to think that they're moving the SEC and bigger and better than things. We've seen them mess that up a lot in the last dozen years. Frankly, I think it would win over a lot of recruits in the Houston area that end up choosing schools like UT Austin or Texas A&M or LSU, and proving to them that, like, hey, you can come to Houston and beat those guys. SEC opponent would be great for your Power 5 opponent and help your strength of schedule a whole heck of a lot. The one drawback to this is Texas does not have an open spot until 2027. So the other thing I thought from that was, like, that's a rival from the Southwest Conference days. Speaking of Southwest Conference days, what is Arkansas doing? Arkansas kind of has some of the same kind of things. Arkansas recruits a lot of Texas, not Houston in the same kind of way, but is another SEC school with SEC credibility, and kind of ended up being one of those teams that spoiled the whole Southwest Conference back in the day. Anyway, they have openings in 2026 and 2027, and that's a rivalry that's not quite as strong as the Texas one. They've played was 18 times and haven't played since 1991. Texas and Houston, for instance, have played 25 times. Right? So it's not quite as strong, but it is one I think is worth investigating. Similarly, Texas A&M, they have an opening in 2026. They have 30. They played Houston 34 different times, another in-state rival, and frankly, from like a geographic standpoint, the closest Power 5 school to Houston in terms of mileage, right? So like another like close combative game, you'd probably end up playing that one energy and just call it neutral every year, right? They're playing each other in basketball this December, right? So like those kinds of things would make some sense to me. So those are three former Southwest Conference teams that I think would behoove Houston to look into if they could get a Power 5 game. However, none of those teams have a 2025 opening, and Houston needs a 2025 game really, really badly. A team I think that they should look into playing that does have a 2025 opening, that is more of a sneaky historical rival than I think people realize, is Florida State. Now, I think when I say Florida State, people go to the Peach Bowl from 2015 and how much fun that season was. Felt like Houston football was back. And for a moment it was. It kind of been a roller coaster since then, right? But Florida State is a historic program. Lots of Heisman winners, lots of national championships, number one overall picks, some of the great defensive backs of all time, and all the kinds of crazy athletes that Florida brings. But Houston kind of owns that series historically. They've played 17 times. Houston's won 13 of them. Every other historical comparison between the programs, you could argue Florida State's in charge of. Florida State has a very commanding lead in most other categories. But in head-to-head wins and losses, Houston has won 13 times. The tricky thing here is that Florida State seems to exclusively play Power 5 schools in their non-conference because they will always play Florida. And as an ACC school, that SEC school counts as a non-conference game. They have matchups with Alabama and Georgia as well in their non-conference slates. They have Notre Dame in there, who's, I guess, technically not a power team because they're not in a conference, but in the same vein. But they do have 2025 and 2027 openings. I think that opens up well for a home and home. The 2027 slate gets really difficult if you play Florida State and LSU, but hopefully by then we've built a program that we're proud of and think can win those games in back-to-back weeks, theoretically. And 2025 would be a fun way to kick off the season. Florida State opens up a Florida versus Texas thing, two of the greatest high school football states on any given year. Either one of those will be the top state in America, right? It also, like, kind of gets Houston into Florida in a different way than just having UCF in the conference does. And again, there's a more of a historical matchup here, I think, than people realize from the heyday of Houston football. In the same vein as that, also in Florida, also has more matchup with Houston than you might realize. I think it's worth looking at the University of Miami. Miami has a 2025 and a 2027 opening. So same kind of thing as Florida State. We could play a home and home in those two. Houston is down in the series. They played in the 80s and 90s when Miami was crazy on top of the world. And Houston was kind of had some really highs and really, really lows, right? So like back and forth there, but have not played a whole lot since then. I like that this is a city school versus a city school as far as like the University of Houston representing the city of Houston, the University of Miami representing the University of Miami. I know Miami is a private school, so it's not quite exactly the same, but I do think that these two programs have some like the history of the 80s kind of runs through these two in a way that I think is worth keeping up. And again, it gets Houston into the state of Florida, very different part of Florida for what it's worth as far as recruiting goes. It'll also, for what it's worth, be another ACC matchup. I think that that's a fun thing to keep in mind because the ACC is like one of those conferences that between now and 2030, who knows what happens, right? I would look at Miami for sure. Now, last and certainly not least, in the same vein as playing SMU as a group of 5 team for your non-conference rivalry, or like to keep that alive, I think Houston, and this may be controversial, tell me in the comments if you disagree, needs to keep playing Rice. Not because it's some little brother you got to go beat up on, though that I would hope that becomes the case with Big 12 resources. Not because they're a bad program. They have JT Daniels this year. Right? Like they could be better this year as we're speaking, right? I think they need to keep playing Rice because that's good for the city. That's good for both schools. Not that we care a whole lot about Rice, I guess, but I think that's a good thing for the culture of Houston to have Houston and Rice continue to play. For what it's worth, Texas Southern is not quite as financially viable a program as Rice itself, but I would say the same thing with playing Texas Southern if possible, right? Like that's a program worth playing across the street, right? Doing things like that for the city of Houston can get Houston out and into your stands more like fully, because frankly, all three of those schools are dramatically different, right? And so the idea that you could have like a game, like sure, I'm cheering for Houston and you're cheering for Texas Southern or you're cheering for Rice or whatever, that's fine. But then when Houston is playing TCU, we can go sit in the same seats and we're both for the city of Houston in that matchup, right? Or when Houston is playing in the theoretical non-conference putting together here, they're playing Texas again. Like we can sit in those same seats, both have Houston Cougar red on because we're both for the city of Houston in a way that I think is worth keeping alive in the city. Getting folks from other schools in the city to your campus, I think, is important. I think people might disagree with me on that. Some people don't want t-shirt fans. That's not the way I am. I think if your program is the kind of brand we're trying to build, then you're going to have t-shirt fans too, right? So I'm into that. I think that's worth keeping. The Rice matchup, that is. If you want to pull in Texas Southern, that's fine. Rice has openings each season between 2024 and 2027. I think they need to get it done. In the third and final segment, I want to talk some about former Cougs. So that was all future Cougar talk. I want to talk some about former Cougs and how those guys are doing in week one, after week one in the NFL preseason. Let's jump on it. So Tank Dell, I think, is the headliner here because not only did he have a crazy fun SportsCenter highlight catch, touchdown catch in his first preseason game. If you missed it, I believe it's Davis Mills rolling out to the left and scrambling and throws it to him. And not a whole lot of scramble, just kind of a duck and dive dodge kind of thing. But Tank is on his back. He's on the ground. He's falling down. And he catches the ball while staying inbounds on a quick little hitch route. Really, really fun play and like crazy balance and control. And great play by Tank. He also, for what it's worth, killed the Dolphins. He had a mutual practice, a combined practice with the Miami Dolphins. And like Tank, by all accounts, was uncoverable. Some of the clips that came out of that joint practice, Tank is like speedster beating guys across the back of the end zone for touchdowns. Really, really impressive showing out of Tank Dell so far. And people are not just Houston Cougar people are calling him a steal of the draft in the third round. A little bit older Houston Cougar alum on the Houston Texans, but Case Keenum looks like Case Keenum. He is still Case Keenum. He can still do Case Keenum things. He is not the guy that can run around quite like he could at 22 years old, but he's still an NFL backup quarterback at the very least, right? I would not be surprised to see him play some games for Houston. I've said on Twitter, I'll say it again. I see the argument for the Texans playing C.J. Stroud. I see the argument for the Houston Texans playing Case Keenum. I don't see one for Davis Mills. And so I could see why or how Case Keenum ends up sticking there the whole season. Another quarterback and signal caller, Clayton Tune. First of all, got a call from Aaron Rodgers. I think I saw that the other day. That was a really cool moment for him. Tune did come on and throw a bad pick right away. There's no way to go about it. It was just kind of, it looked like a first NFL preseason snaps kind of moment. What I liked about Tune was that the rest of that game, he bounced back. He had a great 65-yard strike. It wasn't a touchdown, I guess, but a big throw. He looks good. Let's see how he looks in week 2 this week. He continues to go again. I think there's a chance he starts the first few games for them this season and maybe makes them question what they're doing there in Arizona. Derek Parrish played fine. He's a fullback that's not getting the ball, so it's hard to like grade out what he's doing, especially as he's making transition to a new position. We'll see if they get in the ball this fall or in preseason to see what that looks like. And obviously, as fans of Derek Parrish, the defensive football player, if he gets the ball on offense, we're going to go a little crazy. DeAnthony Jones had a rough start with Chicago. He did level out eventually, but he jumped off sides one play and got a penalty in the second play. Or maybe I have that backwards. His first couple snaps were not great in Chicago in the preseason, but what I liked, again, a lot like Clayton Tune, resilient, bounced back. He's a rookie. It's his first preseason game. I hope people don't hold like the first 2 plays against him moving forward. Logan Hall, kind of another defensive lineman that's worth mentioning in Tampa Bay. Looks like he may start. Another great successful season in Tampa. Tampa might not be as good because the offense is not quite the same based on what they're going to do at quarterback. Looks like they may go Baker Mayfield. I don't know. But Logan Hall himself, I think, will have another individually very strong season. Peyton Turner, another defensive lineman, rush passer kind of guy, had a big QB hit as well. That's all the guys I have time to wrap up today. Houston Cougar football is alive and well in the NFL. Tell us in the comments down below what you're seeing in the preseason as you keep going. We start, I guess, week 2 starts Thursday night, so like tonight of the preseason. Make sure you follow along to see what the Houston Cougars are doing and where they're going to be playing this fall in the preseason tonight. We'll be back each and every day here at Locked on Cougs, as Locked on Cougs is your number one daily Houston Cougar podcast. Thank you all so much for making us your first listen. For a second listen, I'm telling you guys to give Drake a chance over Locked on Big 12. I know he's ruffling on a lot of Houston feathers, but go watch and tell him that. He's a responsive person. I promise. He's a funny guy, even if he's not always on our team as Houston. It's just a fun rivalry thing he has as a Baylor guy. As a Big 12 guy, he is always on Team Big 12, right? So make sure you go give him a listen as well. Thank you all so much for listening to Locked on Cougs. Locked on Cougs, the proud member of Locked on Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs. This sweatshirt did not work for the green screen. Yeah, didn't work.